I'm here with Shannon Lee. Thank you so much for joining me and welcome to Wabi Sabi podcast.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is my pleasure to be here. I'm thrilled to have this conversation.
Um, so, given given the sort of there's an almost Freaky Friday kind of vibe of just we were laughing before I hit record
Yeah,
about just having the right setup or the wrong setup or just saying you know what, this thing will work. That'll, I'm not really gonna stress over this
yeah.
thing or that thing. Um, what are you drinking?
I am drinking tea Kuan Yin,
Mm,
which is one of my favorite teas. It's an oolong, right? And a part of what I love is that it comes in these little wrapped up balls, and then it like unravels and expands, which I love, and it has a really lovely mellow um, goddess of mercy sort of
mhm.
texture to it, like it's really comforting.
That's right. So, for the people who may not know, Guan Yin
Mm,
as a figure is known as the goddess of mercy.
mhm. Yes, and
And it is,
compassion
and compassion.
and children and women and all of these yin states.
Yin states exalted in, I think, probably the most ultimate yin expression, which to me is having a experience of drinking tea. And
Mm,
part of that experience, which I've been privileged to share with you,
yes.
is to host a tea experience, to be brewing, to be sitting, to be gathering, to be sharing silence, to be conversing. That whole experience in the name of in the name of compassion and Guan Yin
Mm,
is
mhm.
something that is harder to do in a pandemic.
Yes.
But to be fair, we're doing it right now, so I'm grateful.
For
I'm
sure.
grateful for you.
Yeah, I'm grateful for you too.
So
I love it. The
yeah,
sounds of life. The
the
sounds
sounds
of
of
life.
the sounds of life, exactly. Yeah, this
you
is
know,
like
and I have to say, like, as what you led into at the top when you said, whether this setup or is it the right one or the wrong one or whatever, it's happening anyway. I've been really trying to sit with this notion of letting go of those types of absolutes of right or wrong and just being with what is, and that, and in the flow of the journey, if you will.
absolutely, I'm in agreement, and it definitely is a journey, constantly every day. And well, there's so many things that I would love to speak with you in this time that we have together, and yet
Yeah.
I've never come into these conversations with this sort of premeditated, like we're gonna talk about ABC,
Hmm.
and I'm always approaching this in the same way that I approach pouring tea, where it's like, imagine it's the first time. Imagine it's like there's a Zen mind, beginner's mind that I aim for
Yeah,
when I approach these. And you just you just released a book called Be Water, My Friend.
I did. Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a really wonderful experience, I have to say. The whole process of writing the book, editing the book, preparing the book, putting it out into the world, and now having it be something that exists. Um, a many layered experience and quite a journey. You know, there was a roller coaster ride to it, and there were parts that were challenging at certain times and challenging at others. But I do feel really good about the book that has been captured. One of the scary things about it was, so I ended up writing the book over the course of about a year. And then once I submitted it to my publisher, my editor, she sat with it for quite a long time, like 5 or 6 months went by before I got comments back, just because there, for no other reason than that they had a bunch of other books ahead of in the queue of mine, and my release date they knew wasn't going to be for a while. So like the work part was getting this first draft in their hands, and that took a year, and that was about rigorous, you know, discipline and deadlines and just getting it out. And then I had all this time where it sat in her hands. And then when it came back to me was, you know, I really had to dig in and look at the comments and make changes. And it was such a, I was so grateful actually that I had all that time. And because one of the things I was experiencing in the whole process of the book from beginning to end was that I was in a extremely personal period of self-growth and learning from a lot of mistakes and my consciousness expanding. And so I was so grateful that I had that time because I got to learn and grow and evolve more during that time, so that when I came back to the book to start editing it, I was in some ways a different person and had clearer eyes and newer eyes with which to look at the material. And the book really benefited from that.
Amazing. And how much of that process happened during this pandemic?
So the book, I let me think about this for a minute. I finished my final edits uh, just as we were going into the pandemic. So probably March or beginning of April, I kind of got it totally done. So when I was sitting and reading it, I really wanted to make sure as much as possible. This is the scary thing about books, and in fact, this is the thing that always stopped my father from writing a book. I mean, there have been many books published since he passed away, but during his lifetime, he was always saying, you know, once it's in a book, it's concretized, and then people will go, that's what he believes, that's it, you know. And he was like, but my whole process is that it's a process without end, and this is what I understand in this moment, but you know, a year from now it could be different, and in fact I want you to explore that process within yourself and not just take something as the gospel truth and, oh, this is what it is, you know, but be in exploration for oneself, you know. And so I really wanted it, at least when I sort of like said goodbye to the book and put it out in the world, to say, like, does this book at least as best as possible reflect my understanding in this moment for who I am right now, in a way that can be that will be useful that will be able to be taken in, that isn't too, you know, like, you have to do it this way or that, you know. Like, I wanted it to have as much of a gentle a way of being received, but by as many people as possible. And I felt that I did the best that I could at that time.
I believe it. I believe it. And I'm saying this as someone who has yet to read the book.
Hmm.
So forgive me for having not been able to set that up prior to this conversation.
That's okay.
But
I have a book for you.
okay.
So I just need to dare to leave my house to get it to you.
I would, yeah. And in good time, I would love to have a physical copy. And honestly, I actually, do you have I'm assuming you have an audio version as well.
I do.
Did you narrate it?
I did.
Oh my gosh. Then I am getting that right after we end this
Yeah.
conversation.
And that did happen in the pandemic.
Yes.
Yeah. So
So, okay. So I'm definitely going to, yes, I'm going to have, I love both.
yeah.
I love, reading as well, as much as I love absorbing
Yeah.
through um,
Yeah.
through auditory means.
Yeah.
Um, and this book, as I understand it, from being able to observe it from this distance, it is about it is taking philosophies of from your dad and compiling them into this format of this book. Is it also an sort of like an autobiographical um, aspect as well? As I mean, how much of you is in this book is what I'm curious about.
Yeah, there's a lot of me in this book, actually. The book is interesting because I actually have it right here. Um, but because it's part self-help book, philosophical manuscript. It's part biography in that I tell a lot of stories about my father, and it's in part autobiography because I talk about myself and my own experience. But it's not 100% any of those things. So it's an amalgamation of those three modes, and I think it works well. But I had to put myself. So my aim, the book is called Be Water, My Friend, and that is a very famous quote of my father's. Um, the long version of which is empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. If you put it into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. If you put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now, water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. So I really took that whole part, plus the other notes that he had around the nature and essence of water, and broke it down chapter by chapter. Um, I broke it down in terms of um, what all the different layers mean, um, how my father applied them in his life, how I have applied them in my own life, and the meaning that I take away from it, and then how you, as the reader, can also apply it to your own life. And it's really just giving you some things to think about and consider. It's not meant to be like, do this, do that. In fact, at the end of the day, the it's meant to just, hopefully open up the reader's mind to some things that maybe they may or may not have considered before. And if they have considered, maybe it's a slightly different way of taking it in. Which, I mean, which is why I think it's important for people to continue to put their understanding of things out in the world, because you never know when it will suddenly make sense to someone who's listening. Um, and so I really felt like I had to talk about myself, because the idea, as you can tell from the quote I just recited, my father had a very poetic way of speaking, and sometimes poetry is open to interpretation and can feel like it's not being 100% direct. And um, and so I wanted to sort of take his thoughts, ideas, and experiences and present them in as simple a way as possible, um, and as plainly as possible, and in like, I have trouble with this, like you probably know what I'm talking about, sort of way, so that anyone, like all the beautiful transcendent philosophy is there, and all of the sort of very utilitarian discourse on it is there as well.
I think it's very, I just have to say, as someone who consumes and absorbs books and media on my terms,
Mhm.
it's very generous of you to have those different and yet cohesive aspects to the book. There is a biographical aspect to it, there's a self-help aspect to it, and there's an autobiographical aspect to it. And so different people can get something different and unique to them as they approach this book differently, maybe at a different time, maybe in a different mood.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
um, I am curious because I've never really asked you this, and so I'm excited to get into this line of thinking in this container of a conversation. What is it like for you to? Um, I don't know if it's solely, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean
Mm.
it's from from my perspective, it looks like you are carrying your dad's legacy as we move forward, in time. What is that like for you?
What is that like for me? I mean, it's so many things. Um, on the one hand, this is actually something I've been sitting with a lot, which is this notion of identity, this notion of uh, who am I, and who am I in relation to this, and is this part of my identity? Is it a meaningful part of my identity? Like, and I think that the answer to that question is in a lot of ways unknowable, as well as meaningful, but also not meaningful, in the sense that, I've really been sitting a lot lately with this notion of meaning, and how these meanings that we create are a form of attachment, and that those attachments create a lot of sufferings, a lot of the time, like they work for a while, and then they stop working. and and so my experience as a person who attempts to work on themselves on an ongoing basis, sometimes with more success than others, but because I'm a human, um, I the more I ask myself the question of, who am I? What is my identity? Um, while at the same time, like growing and having these explorations of consciousness and oneness and wholeness and non-attachment and all of these sorts of things, I start to realize that like the self is dissolving a little bit, and that this life that we live in, and I'll get to answering your question in a minute, but this life that we live in is so challenging because of that. It's like because there is a certain amount of identity and personality and stuff that we have to maintain, that we do maintain, that we kind of need to move through and navigate the world a little bit and all of that. And at the same time, to hold a greater understanding and a greater sense of world, self in relation to world, universe, like a go as big as you want, is it's a great practice, and can be very challenging. So how does that relate to me? I mean, in my life, it's something I've been in relation to my whole life, and it has changed, and I've experimented with different things, and um, I think I'm finally at a stage, especially with the release of this book, even though the book is about my father's philosophies, it's also about my understanding of these philosophies. And I think that this philosophical space is where he and I really intersect, and where we share a oneness. And so there is not necessarily too much of a separation of identity in that space. Um, but then to ask myself, well, but then who am I separate and apart from him? And I do uphold my father's legacy, and I am proud to do that, because I think there's a lot of value to humanity in continuing to put that forth. And there's a large aspect of that is a job. you know, like looking at t-shirt designs and all that kind of stuff is like, that's my job, like, and I need to do a job in order to support myself and all that kind of stuff. But um and the fact that my father, you know I think it's really hard to explain all of this, in words. I'm like having all these feelings in my body right now. I'm like, how do I
Yeah.
describe all of this? But I think that I say this actually in the introduction to my book, which is, um, how can I say, who am I separate and apart from being Bruce Lee's daughter, and it's not possible to separate myself from that. So so the so the question I think I'm coming back to more and more is, that there's no need to separate or to over identify or any of that. There's only a need to search within myself for what is meaningful, and and what choices I'm making in my life. Like I said, like some of what I do is a job, and I do that job. It's not an unenjoyable job, but it's still work. It's still not like it's necessarily lighting me up, and people are demanding emails and answers, and I have to read legal contracts, and I have to da da da. But and that's a choice that I've made, and I can make a different choice at any time. Um, but for now continues to be a valid choice for me. And the writing of this book has somehow opened in me a desire to follow that path in within myself more now, and to make space for that in the world. And again, it's not a path that's entirely divorced from my father either. So I don't know, Adam.
I think there's a very poetic and very real and very complicated version. Can easily be, it's like a slinky of it really isn't, I don't know. And that's why, you know, I I feel like, I mean, first of all, thank you for just exploring that. And you know, I I hesitate to ask what I sometimes I think is such a cliched question.
Hmm.
I don't mean to like, for instance, I equally am curious to ask
Yeah.
another question at that depth or deeper, which is, and we don't you don't have to really go into it if it's there's too many feels, which is understandable. But it's like,
Mhm.
as someone who, I can only imagine the level of loss and grief that you've experienced throughout your life
Mhm.
with the loss of father and your brother. How do you work with that grief and loss,
Mm.
and I feel like you were touching on that in what you were just saying.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been almost an entirety of my lifelong journey as well, because I
Mhm.
lost my father when I was 4. Um, and in a lot of ways, it took losing my brother to even fully understand the significance of the loss of my father. Um, it's been an unfolding of all of this, all of the sensations and subconscious buried traumas and things that have formed me in ways I wasn't even aware of being formed through the lens of these losses and the grief. Um, and it's been a significant. I mean, I have to say one of the things I've been sitting with um, is that I've come to a place of gratitude. I've had a lot of gratitude over time, but I've about different aspects of all of these things that I've processed. But I've come to a place of gratitude recently around having death be one of my most profound teachers, because there's really no better teacher about life than death in a lot of ways, um, because it's, I mean, and we can get into a much more like a larger philosophical conversation about what is death, what is life. But in stark sort of just like common sense, practical human terms, it is the opposite, right? It's the end of what we consider to be our human experience in in this body, right? So so it teaches you about what it is to be in this human body. you know in the most, if you accept to be taught, because obviously we need to invite the lesson and then agree to go on the journey. But I have just felt, I think in the first, easily the first 20, almost 30 years of my life, and I'm 51. So the, or easily the first 30 years of my life, I was like in staunch resistance to that, going on that journey. I was like, nope. you know, and and I was in a lot of interior pain and mild depression throughout most of my life, and I didn't even know it. Um, Certainly, I knew it, but I didn't understand that this isn't how you have to feel. you know, so then when my brother died, and that grief was just like a tidal wave. I mean, it was just so overwhelming to me. um I really felt like I was drowning. I really it really felt like, I don't know, because I had not allowed myself to learn about life through the lens of my father's death. This was like even a, a fully insurmountable occurrence. Like, what? Like, I didn't, because I wasn't raised in a religion. I I didn't have any construct. Nobody had ever talked to me about anything spiritual. So I know concept for any of this. And I remember sort of desperately wishing that I had, because I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know where to put it. I didn't know how to grieve it. I just could just feel this like intense, overwhelming um, mournfulness and desperation. And the crazy part about it is that, when someone dies, there's a lot of crying and grieving that is sort of socially acceptable for a while. and then and then that all goes like under wraps. And it's like I would drive her on the outside to my friends. I was trying to pursue an acting career, which to me is like crazy at this, when I look back on it, like showing up at acting, for auditions, and driving around in my car, having parties. I got married during this time, like all of these things. And I would drive around in my car and I would just sob. Just sob in my car and hope nobody could see me, and I just had this mantra in my head that said, help me, I can't live like this. Help me, I can't live like this. And what I came to realize later is that that was me sending my signal out into the universe, and um, and the universe responded, and help arrived. Now, the difference between doing it that way and doing it consciously is that it took a while for the help to arrive, because I wasn't proactively trying to find help. I was just suffering and subconsciously going, please help me, and I talk about this in the book. And the help that arrived, interestingly, was my father's writings. They were actually given to me totally. I didn't ask for them. And
What forms of writings? Like journals?
so, yeah, so my father didn't journal in the typical sense. Like, he didn't have formal journals. He wrote in some notebooks, but like on little pieces of paper, loose leaf paper. Some stuff is typed, most of it's handwritten. But there, we had all these papers all this time. And of course, I knew the papers existed. And of course, I knew a lot of the general, more popular quotes. And I'd flipped through the Tao Te Ching and different books and things like that. So I was very generally familiar. But my mom was contemplating publishing more of his writings. And so in order to do that, they had made photocopies of all of them. And I was handed, and they were like, well, we made all these photocopies. You want a set? And I was like, okay. And I was handed like a stack, like 3 phone book, for anyone who knows what a phone book is. Hi. Showing my age. Um, of these photocopies of these writings. And I just started leafing through them, and I came across a quote that I had never heard before. And the quote said, "The medicine for my suffering I have within me, but I have within me, but I have not taken it." And then it said, it went on to say, the uh, I wish I had it in front of me right this second, but um, the medicine for my suffering I had within me all along, but I did not take it. My ailment came from within myself, but I did not observe it until this moment. And now I see that if I am ever to find the light, I must be like the candle and be my own fuel. And I don't know what it was just in that moment, maybe just because I saw the word suffering and like the medicine for my suffering. That phrase to me, it just hit me in the chest, and I was like, oh, like you have to actually seek the cure. I mean, yes, can it come over time, or can maybe, you know haphazardly, but you've been going that route now for a long time, because by the way, this is about 7 years after. Well, maybe no, I take that back. It was about 3 or 4 years after my brother died. So I've been suffering heinously for 3 or 4 years. And then I got this. And then over the next three or so years is when I finally started to seek some tools to help me. And then I finally started to heal.
Wow.
Mhm. And I think, this is why this book is important to me,
Mhm.
because what I want to say to people is there are tools, there is help, there's shifts in perspective that can be so meaningful that your whole world can look different. And and there are a million tools out there. Like, even if my book isn't the tool, like maybe it will just crack like the door open just enough that then you can find what actually works for you, because there's so many ways to, and so many methods and so many possibilities. We just we stop ourselves.
It's incredible to hear. Well, first of all, I mean, just to say that, well, I mean, number one, thank you for really going into all that, just to share that recollection and that processing, because there is no one way for people to grieve. There is no right or
Yeah.
wrong. There is no fast or slow. It is its own, you know, it is not a linear time thing.
No,
Um,
I still grieve. I mean, when I
yes.
read the chapter about this in my book for the audiobook, I burst into tears and I had to stop and collect myself in order to read the words on the page. So it's always there. It's something you're kind of always carrying with you.
Yeah.
you know
But to hear you describe how in in the throes of it, you didn't sound like you were seeking guidance or counsel through someone or a guide or a, you know,
no.
but you ended up you ended up finding it in this triple yellow pages stack of these. I mean, you were describing these loose pieces of paper, these notes, these handwritten notes, and I'm getting this visual of like fallen leaves, just like a stack of leaves or something with different colors, and some of the edges are burnt, and it's,
Mhm.
it sounds, it's like, yeah, loose writings and stuff. It sounds, maybe to someone sounds incomplete or imperfect, and yet I look at that and I see that visual as it's so beautiful, because it's so unique and it's so, each one so precious.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm just really grateful that you walk me through that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it taught me a lot. Like, I think that this this grief, and it's been in layers and phases over time, obviously, and different degrees of intensity at different times. But I think that I'm so grateful for it because in a lot of ways, even though it was the most horrific, difficult thing that I've had to do in my life, so far. Um, who knows what's around the corner? Um, I um, I really have gratitude for the way in which it ripped me open, you know,
Absolutely.
and I know that that's hard to hear because nobody wants to suffer. Nobody wants to feel pain and discomfort, especially in the extreme. But sometimes I think up to that point I was living a perfectly fine life, but it was a pretty muted life. It was fairly disconnected, and it was sort of like that's not an option anymore. So um, you have to start figuring this out, or this is how you're going to feel. And I was like, that's unacceptable.
Right, right. And it makes me think of this. I have no idea where the quote came from, but it's something like I've seen it 8 billion times, probably on a coffee mug or in a meme. But the sort of timeless quote of pain is inevitable, suffering is optional,
Yeah, totally.
and that's not to say that anyone's that's not to negate anyone's suffering or to make less of anything.
Yeah.
Um, but in the context with which you speak about your process, it just sounds like a really applicable uh, recollection of that, which is amazing.
Well, and I think now too, I mean, to this notion of death being a great teacher about life, it's sort of like, when you experience the disappearance of a person, like you kind of realize, and people experience it many levels, right? Like they have a pet that dies, they have, any kind of disappearance of the physical form of this thing. Um, um, it it really I sort of lost my train of thought a little bit, but it's sort of like when you experience that, it it suddenly everything else snaps into focus because everything else is sort of a degree of a problem based compared to that. You know what I mean?
Right, right, right.
Now, of course, I've grown and now I have a different concept of the soul, and you know, um, that I have a sense of my father as he still exists. But in the beginning, when you don't have that, it's sort of like there was this person here and now this person is gone, and there's no fixing that, you know. And I feel like everything else, there's a lot more options, you know, on what to do about it. Like this one um, faces you with a very stark contrast.
Yeah, and I think it sounds like the contrast is what can really sort of stifle people. Hi.
Hi.
When are you gonna be done?
I'm gonna be done in a few minutes.
Because I really want to skate in the hallway.
Okay, I give me a few more minutes and then we can totally do that. Thank you for asking. Okay.
I want to skate in the hallway too.
I know this is silver lining of the pandemic is hallway skating.
It's awesome.
Which is actually a really great segue into this, this this last question before we can sort of bookmark it into this next conversation,
Yeah.
which is, how has it almost sounds like a silly question at this point, but taking all that we've spoken about and how we take that into account in terms of being in terms of the journey of parenthood,
Mhm,
you know, because you are a parent, and I'm
mhm.
curious to know what you've in considering what you've experienced, how has that influenced you as a parent?
Well, um, I think that again, back to sort of this notion of bringing everything into focus in a way. Um, I It really helped me to understand, um, to a degree, some of the things that are important, you know. And I didn't I did a lot of my parenting by feel. I still do. And to various degrees of success, but it made me um it I think it's just helped me to see sort of the bigger picture in a lot of ways, which is like, whenever I would start to stress out as parents do about like, when is this phase going to end? You know, am I doing it wrong? Am I ruining my child? Are they going to be that kid that like never figured out how to do blah blah blah? I just it always like they're in a process too, and their process is their own process, and I have to treat this person, no matter what size and what developmental level they're at, as a fully formed human who is now I'm having to shepherd this person through this experience of life on earth, which is super challenging, and it's made it a lot easier for me. Like, I'm like, this person, uh the shepherding of this person is extremely important to me. It's extremely important to me to attempt to give her the tools that I didn't have. Um, it's extremely important to be as open and communicative with her as I can, um, because I understand the consequences of not having been communicated to, or not having at least even been shown different possibilities. Um, I can't I can't, you know, force my will onto her, like I guess all of this, like this notion of who especially in this world of social media and like all this stuff, like who are you? What's your identity? What does being Bruce Lee's granddaughter mean to her? All I can do is sort of continue to try to point out, to to give her as many tools and as much inner strength as and love and light as I can, and be there to, you know point at different things at different times as needed. um but that the thing I try to instill in her is that it doesn't matter who you are, what you do. What matters is, are you feeling good as much as you can? Are you able, throughout as much of your life as possible? Like, to me, at the end of the day, that's what's most important, and the rest of it is all just, you know, it's it's just the dressing. I don't know, it's the set dressing.
Totally.
and
Yeah.
I think that I had to grow through a lot, like have a lot of awarenesses and awakenings to be able to then be able to to give that perspective. Without the healing that I've done in myself and the understanding, I mean, I have to tell you, when I finally started working on myself and healing, uh, you know the majority the immediacy of the grief that I was feeling. And I kind of woke up out of like a mild depression that I'd been carrying around for 20 years of my life, for 25 years of my life. I um I was like, oh, I mean, like, have you had that experience too, where all of a sudden when you finally sort of process through something and you go, oh, it's possible to feel good on a fairly consistent basis. That is possible.
Yeah, I'm like, do I answer that guy? Is it
Yes,
like,
no, please. It's a conversation.
absolutely, yeah, because there's so much, there's so much
Yeah.
to especially with this particular topic.
Mhm.
I in my own story, in my own hero's journey, I've been dealt with the blow of profound loss in a completely different terms.
Mhm.
And I'm watching how I'm choosing to um, deal with that as I'm parenting.
Mm.
I'm dealing with like just a just a short version, but
Yeah.
I'm moving forward into parenthood, dealing with like abandoned father and like I'm estranged from my mother. So it's a very, very twisted branch situation going on.
Mhm. Mhm.
And for many years it was the thing that defined me.
Yeah.
There's a very like there's a we've been watching Kung Fu Panda like a bunch in this
Uh-huh.
house, and there's like a parallel there. It's like, well, are you, like, who are you, Po? Like, are you the panda who's been um marked by or defined by this loss? So that's something that's always in my head for me, um but being able to ride the waves of grief,
Yeah.
because they come and they go. And
Mhm.
sometimes it, I find like, oh, and I'm now in like in a self-inquiry process with a guide who is helping me out, and to be able to notice like, oh, if I can make space for those feelings for this hour or this day, and just consider that tides go high and low, then it's going to be okay. And to be able to reflect on all these things, all these feelings as I move forward, but not be defined by them as I move forward into parenthood. So,
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And it's a similar sense for me. It's like I feel these feelings wash through, or these thoughts that pop up out of nowhere sometimes, and I'm just like, whoa. But I to just sort of allow them to surface and then move on, and my work to be to return to my essential nature, right? And it's like, and sometimes those things require a little bit of, like, investigation. Got to dig down. What is that? Where's that coming from? How can I sort of root that out?
mhm.
But as you do that work, more and more those thoughts and feelings and things, they'll come in. They'll kind of go like, you know they'll rain. They'll do the little storm thing, and then the clouds will pass.
There's a lot of water in this conversation.
Yeah.
There's the tea, and there's waves, and there's tides, and I love it. It's like, it's so,
Yeah.
it's, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
um, so I have a hallway skating uh,
Date that you need
date
to get
that I
to.
need to get to. I I don't. It's like having such a thoughtful conversation at this level. It's always jarring to like kind of ascend from, but I always want to bookmark with every guest. And I'm really grateful for the space and the time that we shared.
I'm really grateful too. And I have to say, like, this is one of my favorite things to do, which is just to contemplate and try to express.
Yeah, expressing the inexpressible is really
Exactly. Yes.
what people it would serve more people, especially right now, because we're in a constant reactive state driven by outrage and shock and uncertainty. And
Yeah.
so we'll talk next week.
Yeah, great. Same time, same place. I'll be right here. I'll probably have a different sweatshirt on, but but the background will be the same probably,
Yes.
unless I'm in my car. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think car talk is really it's a whole vista to explore. But Shannon, it's an honor and a privilege to have you. And everyone should go either get a physical copy of Be Water, My Friend, or do what I'm also going to do, which is enjoy the audio version narrated by Shannon.
Yes. Well, thank you.
And thank you. And I really look forward to not only our next conversation in this space, but the opportunity to share tea with you in person
Yes.
whenever feels appropriate or safe.
Yes, definitely. I definitely in agreement. I'm all for it. And I really appreciate the ability to have this conversation with you. So thank you. Thank you for asking me.
It's my pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Yeah. All
All right.
right.
Have a great weekend.
All right. You too.
Bye.
Bye.